Worked out pretty well. Thanks for being here, guys. I guess let's go around and do a quick round of intros and I guess maybe a 15-second TLDR of what you guys focus on in the space as it's relevant for this panel.
Thanks. Hi everyone, my name is Darren. So I'm a research analyst at Nansen, focusing on smart money and fund doxing, basically. Yeah, so Nansen AI is a super app in the blockchain analytics space, and we want to make data a lot more readable, a lot more accessible for everyone. Thanks. Thank you.
Myself, I'm TM Lee, co-founder and CEO at CoinGecko. So CoinGecko is basically the crypto market data aggregator, and we strive to provide as many data as possible for all kinds of tokens you're looking for. We see a future that's going to be millions and millions of tokens, and we want to make data as accessible via the website and also for developers to consume.
Hi, my name is Matthew. So I'm the CEO and founder of Etherscan. So Etherscan is basically a tool that allows you to explore blockchains. And our core mission is basically to provide equitable, human-readable blockchain data to the masses. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you guys for that. And I'm actually excited to be able to ask you all some questions because aside from focusing on stacks, I actually helped co-found a company called Conductive.ai, and we do marketing analytics and insights for Web3 companies for things like user acquisition, user retention, and we make heavy use of, I think, each of your products in terms of piping in data. And so I think where I'd like to go next is, data infrastructure can seem a little boring to people, maybe it's not the first thing they think of when they think of the innovation in this space. But I actually think it's one of the most important parts of the evolution and what people are building right now. So I guess for each, if you briefly want to kind of say, what role do you kind of see data infrastructure and the analytics layer of this technology playing, especially right now during this builder market? Where are we, and what are some of the kind of biggest gaps being solved?
Yeah, I can go first. So I think for us at CoinGecko, we are focused more on market data and token and coin prices. And even in this current climate, there are lots of developers coming in to build in this space, thanks to all the fundraising that has been going on in the last 2 years. I guess that's why there's a lot of demand for data, and especially market data that they need to plug into their dApps and apps. So I think on the problem at our end is, while we have, you can just ask for any kind of coins that you can think of, you can get the price data to come back to you from CoinGecko, but at the back of the hood, there's actually a lot of work that's going on for us, and one of the most important things is figuring out from all the different sources, how do we give you the best price, and how do we get rid of the outliers, how do we get rid of funny prices that that you don't want to think about. So I think for us, it's always listening to what the developers are looking for, closing the gap, how can we make it as easy as possible for you to consume. There's always going to be work that needs to be done, and there's always new players coming in to also provide data prices for coins and tokens as well. And I think collectively, because this is such an integral part in the space, it will always be around, and we'll always just have to keep moving the space forward and innovating and make it easier for developers to keep building stuff. And with that, we'll see more use cases being explored from just a primitive of price for tokens.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I think our focus really would be, this builders market is really just making the data a lot more readable. So I think in this room, probably all of us understands what's a transaction hash, what's a token transfer, what's an internal transaction. But the problem comes when we want to onboard the next 1 billion users. So I actually have my mom and my schoolmates, right? They ask me about NFTs. They ask me, hey, how do they mint this or whatever? And I would send them the link to the website, or maybe a link to a transaction hash, but they have no idea how to interpret it. And they're too lazy to try to interpret it. So I think what we're trying to build is something that can address this problem. something that's able to abstract away the underlying data, the raw data, so to make it just when they see something, they know exactly what it is, even if there's almost no like blockchain or crypto experience. So I think the principle would be just making the data a lot more understandable, analyzing it, drawing the insights, and making it interpretable by almost anyone. Yeah.
Perfect.
So I like going the last because most of the things have already been covered. So I think unlike the other cycles, right, where we've seen a lot of projects running out of funds within the data space, right, I don't think we will see this happening during this run. The reason being is a lot of the companies are just much more well-funded, much more well-prepared. So I think having said that, I think we'll see I would say the same bunch of companies continuing to improve their products to make it more robust. And I think at the same time, one of the core goals of a lot of data companies would be actually to make the data more human readable so that it's accessible to masses, like what Darren's mentioned. You give someone a transaction hash, it's 64 random characters, like how do you send it to your mom or dad and then have it interpreted in a way that's easy to understand. So I think a lot of folks for this builder cycle would be geared towards bringing blockchain to the masses, bringing it mainstream.
No, appreciate that. And I think what's interesting about all three of your answers, and I think there's a lot of truth to it, is, all three, I think, of your answers focused on kind of B2C, the end user, kind of using this data for the different use cases depending on which of the platforms interacting with. How do you see the current state of the B2B market when it comes to data infrastructure in this space? And I mean, is that something you're each focused on, or is it really more of the end user that you're continuing to prioritize? Yeah, I guess Darren, if you want to start.
All right, thanks. So how do we see the B2B market, right? So I would say we're barely scratching the surface of it. I think it's precisely because the blockchain data is so transparent. So I mean, if you look at OpenSea, right, they launched the Seaport. So basically, in every transaction now, you have the royalties going directly to the collection. So in theory, you can immediately create like a live reporting revenue for individual collections. You can look at who is buying, who is selling. Like so I think we're just barely scratching the surface. I mean, you can develop like P ratios, which would make like the people on Twitter like super excited, even though it's not very important. Yeah, so I think like we're just barely scratching the surface, and I think now we're very focused on projects and protocols. Because of how the data is so transparent, because of how everyone's address and history, every protocol has you can define their user stickiness, you can define their user adoption, their user growth, their user numbers, and a protocol can look at both their own projects and their competitors as well. So I think that is something that is just getting started. So I think for Nansen we actually have like a query squad whereby we focus on B2B and just serving data to protocols, DAOs, exchanges, even funds, etc., etc.
Yeah, perfect. TM, if you want to go next.
I don't really see a lot of distinction between the B2B to B2C right now. It feels like the B and the C is BC. I think having said that, I guess when you talk about B2B, you're talking about like traditional enterprises that you will sell and work with in terms of the data. I guess on our end, it's so we have end users, which is the retail users, and we also work with projects. So in our context, the B2B are the projects. So working with the protocols themselves and like blockchains themselves, and to figure out how do we build data products around those protocols like blockchain explorers. So in our context, that is our B2B.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so we have the website, which is, in our perspective, consumers, like retail users, anyone who wants to look up prices. And then we have the APIs that has been around for a while. It could be small businesses, individual developers, or big businesses. Those are the B2B in our perspective. And I think one key takeaway that we have learned is also while the data space in crypto is relatively new, if you want to reach out to any of these entities at all that wants to consume data to integrate into their apps, they like to work with things that are familiar and things that they have control over. So one example is that the CoinGecko API is it's a centralized API that you can, there's a API key and, it's a JSON RESTful response that you can expect the kind of output that you want to work with. In contrast, we also start to see a lot of decentralized APIs for data as well, which is a great thing for the space. Like we kind of need that for the space to move forward. I guess one of the tricky part is trying to cross that chasm where can developer get predictability? Is it within the expectation that they're looking at? Can they control their finances when they interact with all these kind of APIs? And those are the tricky part with regards to how B2B looks at data stack. And I think for us, we are trying to slowly bridge towards the end goal is to try to get to a point where we can fulfill all these needs for the developers in this space. Yeah.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And I guess maybe a little more explicit in terms of what I'm seeing and kind of what I'm asking around. And this gets into a little bit with, I guess, how you each currently see your competition is, I think a lot of the use cases, to all of your points, because this data is so open, have been a little more end user or end developer focused. One of the things I've seen both as a pain point myself as a founder, and also what I'm now seeing addressed more and more on the venture side of the market is this rich data that is fed by a lot of services in different ways that has the rich ability to be queried and to really pull a lot of these insights out. Yet, I think what we're kind of seeing right now is in order to do that, projects basically need to create entire data teams within their kind of core team, and it ends up being a bit of distraction away from developing the core product. With that, what I've seen the last 3 months specifically has been a huge uptick in this pre-seed and seed venture market of companies raising around solving this problem specifically. How do you guys think about that? Do you see that as competitive to what you're trying to do or markets that you might be trying to expand into in the future? Do you see it more as complementary and these are kind of new potential customers for the products and services you provide? Just kind of interested in kind of how you see that. TM, if you want to start.
Yeah, sure. So so we've been in the space for quite a while, since 2015, right? And we've seen that whole data space evolve. So I will say, right, if you look at even look at the products that we're building here, right, and probably yourself, right, there's a lot of overlaps, right? But I think the market is a lot more diverse than what it was a couple of years ago. So yeah, there are overlaps, but then again, I think if you look at products, right, each of these products have their own specific use case or things that they are really good at. So I don't see that as an issue, and I think that only helps the ecosystem. And at the same time, yeah, I know any infra stuff is hot, as we've seen over the last couple of months.
Well, bear markets, everyone goes back to infra, right?
Yeah, but that having said, I think a lot of these companies are quite well funded, so I think they'll still continue building it out. So I think that the market is large enough so that there are use cases that products can be targeted to and do specific. So yeah, definitely some overlaps, but still niche in some of the features they can offer.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so agree with Matt said, like the space is big enough that a company can be formed, specifically a certain kind of niche. Although I will also say that the space continues to grow and change over time, that whatever stack that you have right now can either be, a foundational point to build something bigger, or it could be deemed to be maybe like outdated, for instance, in the next few months or the next few years, when the whole market or when the whole infra change itself. I guess in our perspective also, when it comes to pricing data, on one hand, it may be simple if you look at a subset kind of data. Let's say, for example, you're focused on certain kind of protocols, certain kind of chains, but we're looking at to cover every single chain and every single protocol and every single possibility out there. It gets more and more difficult, and that's where companies can form a niche by itself, right? We'll make sure that we provide a service that you don't have to worry about how to statistically decide which price is the best to pick, uptime, and also what if if I create my own RPC and I run behind the blocks, all this kind of nitty-gritty detail that allows you to keep your uptime and your up service. So at the end, I think there will be some form of specialization once any of these companies decide for themselves what they want to niche into. Yeah.
Makes sense. Darren?
Yeah, definitely agree with Matthew and Tien. I think there is a lot of space in the market. So I think just an example would be maybe like 3 user profiles, right? An NFT trader on Solana, an NFT trader on Ethereum with a stack of 1 ETH, and an NFT trader on Ethereum with like 100 ETH. So all of them are looking for very different things, time frame, short term, long term. Some of them are looking at the community strength, some of them are looking at the long-term holders, some of them are looking for like the degen mints, like 1 second, 2 seconds later, what's being minted and quickly minting. So I think because of such a diverse profile, and I mean, if you bring in like funds or, like protocols, it's like, I think a lot of different use cases, a lot of different projects, people all looking for different things. So I think like the space is still pretty huge. I think, but that being said, I believe there'll be some sort of aggregation eventually, because some of the user profiles might shrink while others might grow. So I think besides appealing to the different user stories or user profiles, there needs to be some sort of edge. I think, for example, Nansen, we try to have our labels as a moat, right? So being able to sort of pinpoint whether an address is a fund, which fund, jump trading, 3AC, stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's actually getting exactly into the topic I kind of wanted to cover, because one of the interesting things to think about, especially if you think about will the Web3 data layer and space evolve similar to how Web2 has, one of the things that I think is interesting, and it was brought up earlier, is data is open and free to some degree to consume in this space. So how do you think about creating a moat around your product long term? TM, if you want to start.
Yeah, I would think niching into solving a problem for a specific community is one way to build your initial moat. And if that community happen to grow along with the industry or happen to be big enough, then that becomes a moat by itself, because these early adopters trust your data. You have some track record of understanding what your audience wants and always giving them the kind of service that they need. So I think that's like one good way. And because this space is so diverse and there's always new categories, right? Let's say music, art, virtual land or metaverse or what have you. And these are all niches that any developer can explore and build a moat themselves. How would it look like if the niche were to grow into a big size? And yeah, that's where things get competitive. And I think as entrepreneurs, you always have to ask yourself, where can I carve myself a niche that I can dominate against the bigger players? And I think the playbook has always been somewhat similar with regards to Web2 in that sense. But the only difference right now is that it may get a little bit more too competitive if it drags a lot of eyeballs, because data is freely accessible. And as you mentioned, no longer like the Web2 space where only the big tech have all this data behind their walled garden. Yeah.
Yeah. Darren?
Right. I think for moats, I would see like the 2 principles. So one is you do something that's really difficult that no one else can really replicate, or you do something that no one has really done, so you build advantage there and you just compound advantage. I think for Nansen specifically, it's the labels that we have, the fact that we have entities that we have coverage for over 100 million different wallets. But I think that's just like the first step. I think the next step also is being able to sort of quantify the history or the actions of every single address. So maybe, for example, for the OGs out there, like an address that farm Wi-Fi would be very different from an address that just started like yesterday, right? Like if you were there during the DeFi summer and stuff like that. So yeah, I think a large part of the moat for Nansen specifically would be the labels, and then there'd be like V1, but iterating upon the labels. So let's say I have 2 fund labels, right? Fund, and they both belong to, let's say, 3AC. And then I see that they sent an address this amount of money, and I know that, so A, B, C, I know that A and C are 3AC, then I can infer that B is most likely 3AC. So I think that's how the label advantage sort of compounds itself, and then just constantly increases our coverage and our understanding of every single address on the blockchain.
Yeah, so it kind of actionable insights around that. That makes sense. Matt?
I think it's difficult to build a moat around blockchain data. The reason being is, so I think a lot of us got into Web3 was because the blockchain data was not siloed, so it wasn't centralized, it wasn't controlled by a few large entities. So given that, right, on the other side, it also means that anyone can come in and build your own data products. Anyone can grab labels from another site on stuff, and you can replicate that data. So at the end of the day, everything that you see can be replicated. And we've always seen this happen. You build something, it gets copied, it gets replicated. Because the raw data is still, it's out there for you to grab. You can go out, you can pull it in, you can enrich it, and you can have your own data analytics side. So I would say not so much of a moat, but I think if you want to compete within this space, I think it's figuring out what you're good at, what you like doing, doubling down, and then just continue focusing in that and trying to build the best product that you have there. So yeah, that's my take on it.
Yeah, makes sense. And also, helps when you've been doing it pretty much since the very beginning of the protocol you focus on.
Yeah, so that's why, so like when we first started out, it was only us, right? So right now, there's like a lot of other players in the space building the same thing. So building a moat is challenging. You can try to build a good product and hope that your community appreciates it, and at the same time figure out if you have a niche. Yeah, so it's a combination of all those factors.
No, that makes sense. And a related point, I'd actually love to start with you on TM, because I think it's specifically probably most relevant to CoinGecko, although certainly relevant for both Nansen and Etherscan as well, is we've talked about trust and the decentralization of the space, and the data is public. So theoretically, no matter what your API is delivering or your product is showing, you can get external confirmation of that. But as the use of some of the products and services grow and become dominant in their market, how do you guys think about the centralization risk there? For instance, I know there were tons of concerns, and maybe where you guys got kind of a boost competitively when CoinMarketCap was acquired by Binance, seeing that as, adding in some potential issues with the trust that the market gives that. Similar, in a related vein, although a bit different in terms of the risk, I think, if Etherscan, for instance, were to go down today, it's not like the data on the Ethereum network is compromised or isn't there anymore, but the amount of products and services that would break from that would be, pretty catastrophic. So how do you all think about the potential centralizations and risks around the products and services you're building?
Yeah, so I think that's a concern that I actually kind of have as well at the back of my head, even though I'm running a service in this manner. So I think like for us right now, the main goal for us is to give developer what they need in the most convenient way possible, which is in a way centralized API, get the data in and build your own stuff and move the space forward. Which is why I also mentioned earlier about decentralized data infrastructure, which is something that I'm also interested in. Whether what we have out there is the perfect version that it can be solved, or whether is that something that I myself have been thinking about, like how we at CoinGecko can mutate into that in such a way that I don't want to also decide about everything. Right? I want to ensure that there is secondary or tertiary confirmation you can have for any kind of data you look at. There's also other ways for people to play a part in the curation of the data and things like that. It's something I've been thinking at the back of my head as the space continues to grow, but I just don't know of any perfect solution yet. But I do feel that if you want a dApp or a DAO that's truly decentralized, you can't just rely on everyone running their own nodes to get your own data, because it just wouldn't work. You need some kind of middleware that aggregates and combine those data in a way that developers can consume and plug it into your app. Just that right now it's just not that convenient or not within the expectation of the developer, but I'm hoping to see that someday. Hopefully we can solve it eventually.
So decentralization, in my opinion, is not binary. It's not a 0 or 1. So there are different levels of decentralization. At least on our end, right? So when we're building something, right? So I think even within that decentralized space, right? Regardless whether it's decentralized or no, or very decentralized or lesser decentralized, right? That there are always going to be product leadership. So there will be products that people like to use, right? But I think having said that, within the space, right? The minute you don't do your job well, right? There will be someone waiting to step up and take your place. So I think that sort of system of check and balances. Having said that the data is accessible, right? So if you're not doing things right, you're not doing it well, someone will come in, grab that available data that's already out there and build a similar product. So the way I look at it, I think there are multiple layers, like even the products that we're building out here right now, there are competing products, right? So if product A doesn't work, you can fall back on to product B. Yeah, it will be a little bit inconvenient, but eventually market forces will dictate that they will be able to step up and replace you. So yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. The kind of organic, iterative competitiveness that exists in the open source world to a degree. Yeah, Darren, anything to add?
Yeah, I think they pretty much covered everything. But just to echo Matt's, like I think it always goes back to the trilemma. So if you want like a fully, to echo Matt, like how decentralization is a spectrum, right? And it goes back to trilemma. Like if you want a fully decentralized opt, you want to say like, can we add a column to a table? Then we vote for it. Take 2 days and stuff like that. When a developer could add that in 5 minutes. So I think it's always about trade-offs, and it just depends. Like the market will decide whether it's worth trading this for less decentralization versus we shouldn't give this up for more decentralization.
That makes sense. I guess I'll go back to you, Darren, as well. In kind of the builder market we're in, and I kind of laugh, but at times like these, in my opinion, are the best time to be in the space because so much of the noise quiets down, and I always laugh because I always think, at the end of a bull cycle, like, oh, I'll finally get the time to breathe and relax, and then I remember how incorrect that view and assumption is because I get busier than I've ever been. But, in the current builder cycle we are, everything you all are kind of focused on, iterating on at the moment with your products, what do you think are some of the biggest use cases that the evolution of the data infrastructure layer will unlock in the next few years?
Well, that's a tough question. So I think in the builder market, so evolution will unlock. Right. I think one pretty powerful use case would be financial reporting. So I think how I see it is that actually every single NFT collection is a business, is a company, and they raise by their mint. Not necessarily through equity, but just the fact that they're minting the raise, right? And the fact that we have almost no color on how a NFT collection is spending their money is insane. Like the only people that know would be those on-chain detectives in Discord. They snoop around the addresses and stuff like that, and then they find out that maybe, for example, the NFT collection is paying the founder like 6 figures a month or something. So I think financial reporting would be a pretty big deal. I think, another example to sort of like emphasize what I described just now would be understanding more about the different users. So I think eventually you'll reach a scenario whereby you plug in an address to a platform, and then you not just see the history, but you see like exactly what they did, what points of history they were. Did they mint like a huge NFT? Maybe they minted loot, or maybe they they participated in like a very exciting farming time, stuff like that. So so I think 2 things. One would be financial reporting, and the other one would be like a sort of, I wouldn't call it snapshot, but like a user story whereby you don't just see the individual transactions, but you know exactly the credit history, the actions of a user, and what sort of behavior he has, and what sort of quote unquote like person the address is like.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think one thing I would share about regards to this is when Web 2.0, I'm not sure if anyone in the room remember, came out, there was this promise of a mashup where you can combine data from Facebook, you combine data with Twitter, you combine data with various different social network or different platforms and come up with a new kind of application. And the promise didn't really turn out that well because in the end, all these services ends up locking up their data and their API from developers from using it. But in terms of the Web3 space, it's like a buffet for you. You have all kinds of data services that you can choose from, centralized, decentralized, on-chain, off-chain, what have you. And all this is available for developers to pick up and build stuff. So in terms of what kind of use case is available, it's very hard to say, but this possibility is right there. Any developer can just come in, even though you don't raise any VC funding, you can just build something that's interesting, take all this data as you want, and create a new use case. And it could be a new product for a new category that creates its own new market that never existed before. So I think that is what makes Web3 much more promising, in my opinion, than what used to be in the last tech wave.
Yeah, absolutely. The open social graph and ability to combine is maybe finally a reality. Yeah, Matt?
So I think blockchain data is a treasure trove of data. It's permanent, right? And it's not really being fully tapped. You have a lot of data companies out there, no, but if you look at the size of the data copies that we have right now, no, and look at like Google, right, which is obviously starting to look into it much more actively. It's just not tapped yet. I mean, you do something in the blockchain right now, it's permanent. 10 years down the road, right, if a super large data company wants to go in and mine that data, they'll be able to build a whole profile of your activities on chain. It's just not tapped yet. And I think, having said that, we will likely see a lot of same stuff happening, like even in Web2, right? So, you know, you have a lot of machine learning, pattern recognition, and stuff like that. I possibly foresee the same things being applied to Web3 data, given that it's even more accessible. And the difference here is because the data is not siloed, your time entry doesn't matter. You can go in right now, you can do it 5 years down the road, you still have access to that same amount of data.
That's a fascinating point, and you actually bring up something that I think I saw a tweet about the other day of like, the Google of Web3 has not been built yet, and thinking of what that means and what that could look like, given, I think, the point that you make.
Everyone's trying to build that. The Google Web3.
It's true, but I think you bring up a great point about this is permanent and going back and having that view of scraping and indexing for some sort of use, you know, it is funny to think about if you could take the Google interface but apply it to Web3, what it would be a search index or engine for, what it could be. But yeah, so I think we have a few minutes left. Do you guys have anything you'd like to ask each other? Not to turn the spotlight around, but
yeah, not on spotlight. We've already had a small discussion in the back there.
Okay, well, fantastic. Well, thank you all for your time. Pleasure to kind of hear some of your insights. And again, I think the data layer, although it may seem like a little bit more mundane, is actually where I see, if not the majority, a huge amount of innovation coming in the next couple of years. Because as someone who's been building a little bit on top of that layer, we need the innovation to happen there and the continued evolution to happen there. I think in order to set up and enable a lot of maybe some of the more top-line use cases that grab the headlines more, but really aren't possible in a feasible way yet today. So thank you all for your time.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.